What's going on? All thanks for tuning in once again. So it's official. Wilder and Scott have part ways. I think this is good news. If I'm perfectly honest, Malik Scott wasn't really the right trainer for Wilder, in my opinion. He got him to do a lot of drills and things like that, and you would see him talking a lot about changing Wilder. That you're going to see a different Wilder. I'm going to, pull things out of his toolbox that he never had. The thing is that you can't just experiment these things against these top level fighters. Wilder was a guy that started boxing late. Everyone knows him for the right hand. That's what he brings. Straight right, one of the best in the sport. And Malik Scott was just complicating things, making things harder for Wilder. In my opinion, he was overworking Wilder. He was doing drills that he never needed to learn. The only thing that Wilder really needed to learn, in my opinion, was his defense. Throwing the jab more. We would see him doing all these drills and things like that, and no one really wanted to see a different Wilder. We just wanted to see him, land the right hand and knock them out. And a lot of that's with timing, So I mean, guys like Usyk and these Ukrainian fighters, their trainer, they train them with timing. A lot of things to do with coordination and things like that. Hitting the bag and hitting the mitts with doing combinations. That wasn't really helping Wilder. We really knew that he was fast. We really knew that he could, throw punches if he wanted to, but he was the sort of guy that would set you up with the right hand, and normally it will be with the 1-2. All these drills, to the body and the head was unnecessary in my opinion. Like I said, I felt like he was overworked. He was trying to change Wilder into a boxer, into a guy that would run these drills and land these combinations on elite fighters, and that was never going to happen. This isn't Wilder coming up. This was Wilder challenging guys at the top, trying this new style and things like that. It wasn't good for him. I truly believe that he chose the wrong trainer, in the Fury trilogy. I think that Wilder just had that much heart that he just put on a good show regardless of who trained him. He really needed to work on his defense in that fight. And the last two fights, he just looked like he was overtrained, in my opinion. He just wasn't letting his hands go. Maybe he was overthinking things with the drills, with the combinations. I do know that he has had surgeries on his shoulder. But, he wasn't really throwing the jab as well. You could say, well, the shoulder wasn't great, he needed surgery, but he wasn't letting the lead hand go, the jab. You hardly saw him throwing the jab against Zhang. Was he thinking about doing combinations, maybe going to the body, overthinking things? With Wilder, he just needs to work on timing and work on defense. We know that right hand's there and needs to let that jab go, let that lead hand go. Don't abandon the jab to keep guys away. You can't just have guys pressing them to the ropes like what Zhang done. He's got to use that jab to keep them away. So I mean, this is in my opinion good news. I never thought that Scott was the right trainer for Wilder since he joined them. Because they had multiple training camps, before that Fury fight, and basically, once Fury caught him, he was able to take control deep inside the pocket. So let's see what happens. I think that this is, like I said, a good thing for Wilder. Wilder's a guy that, is good with that right hand when he lands it. And with Breland, he was, in my opinion, at his best. I think with the second Fury fight, it was just a case of Fury having the right game plan on the night, and Wilder wasn't prepared, for that rush. And then with Scott stepping in, I just think that he was the wrong guy to train Wilder. Wilder's got great heart, regardless. Even with the Zhang knockout, he got back up, from that hard hit. Even with the trilogy fight, when Fury knocks him out, he gets back to his feet in time, but the referee waves it off as you can see that he's hurt. He does get back on his feet, or he attempts to at least. He gets up on his own. This isn't Joshua knocked out cold against Dubois, where he needs assistance. He actually gets up on his own. And, regardless, he's got great heart. He just needs to work on, like I say, timing. Like there's Ukrainian fighters, they do a lot of coordination things, We see Usyk juggling and things like that, and, working on timing a lot. That's what Wilder needs to work on, just getting that timing back. Letting his hands go and hitting the mitts, with speed and doing combinations isn't really helping him. It's about the coordination and the timing. And I think that, with Malik Scott out of the way, trying to change Wilder into a boxer, trying to change him into something that he's not used to, or he shouldn't be attempting to do against top level fighters, isn't the right thing to do. Like I was saying, Malik Scott was trying to change Wilder, and then he was trying to get him to basically use these new techniques against top level fighters. It's something that you want to do against guys when you're coming up, so you can learn along the way and you can actually understand, how it works, and then you get better in time. Wilder's at a point where he's going to be fighting these top guys. You can't just be learning these new ways of, trying to break guys down. We know that Wilder's got the equalizer anyway. He's got that right hand, one punch really, one punch knockout. And most of the time guys don't get up. Tyson Fury's the only guy that really survived against Wilder. I know Stavern did in the first fight, but in the second fight, Wilder knocks him out in the first round, I believe, So, Fury gets knocked down in the trilogy, in the third fight. And he's just one of those rare guys that gets back to his feet and can still survive, So, we know that Wilder's got the knockout power. With Scott out of the way, I'm happy about this. I'm hoping that Wilder does knock out Herndon as I expect him to, within 3 rounds. And then after that, let's see how he looks against these top guys, at the top. Let's see if this changes anything with Scott gone. I believe that it may. Who knows? Wilder is getting older, but he does look like he's still got the speed, and he still has the power for sure. With heavyweights, power is always the last to go. So, I'm expecting Wilder to possibly get into, maybe possibly a title shot, with Scott out of the way. I still think he has a couple of years left in him. A lot of people think he should retire. He started late, I don't think that this is it for him. I think he's still got a chance to, get the title. Let's see what happens anyway. Looking forward to the fight. I'm expecting a Wilder knockout round 3. Leave your take on the split with Scott. What do you think about it? And feel free to leave it in the comments. If not, I'll catch you next time. Enjoy the fight and have a great day. Peace.